This is Answers in Stoicism, formerly the Stupid Monkey Philosophy channel. Alright, so at a channel rebranding. Still on the fence about it, but looks good to me. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you are subscribed to this channel, no doubt you have some interest in philosophy. One of my favorite philosophers is Marcus Aurelius, and one of his big influences, who he often quotes, is this guy, Seneca the Younger. So we're just going to read from the Wikipedia article, the history of Seneca, his life, and his philosophy. Alright. Lucius Annaeus Seneca the Younger, 4 BC to AD 65, usually known mononymously as Seneca, was a Stoic philosopher of ancient Rome, a statesman, a dramatist, and in one work, satirist, from the post-Augustan age of Latin literature. Seneca was born in Colonia Patricia, Corduba, in Hispania, and was trained in rhetoric and philosophy in Rome. His father was Seneca the Elder. His elder brother was Lucius Junius Gallio Ennianus, and his nephew was the poet Lucan. In AD 41, Seneca was exiled to the island of Corsica under Emperor Claudius, but was allowed to return in 49 to become a tutor to Nero. When Nero became emperor in 54, Seneca became his advisor and, together with praetorian prefects Sextus Franius Burrus, provided competent government for the first 5 years of Nero's reign. Seneca's influence over Nero declined with time, and in 65, Seneca was forced to take his own life for alleged complicity in the Pisonian conspiracy to assassinate Nero, of which he was probably innocent. His stoic and calm suicide has become the subject of numerous paintings. As a writer, Seneca is known for his philosophical works, and for his plays, which are all tragedies. His prose works include 12 essays and 124 letters dealing with moral issues. These writings constitute one of the most important bodies of primary material for ancient Stoicism. As a tragedian, he is best known for plays such as Medea, Thyestes, and Phaedra. Seneca had an immense influence on later generations. During the Renaissance, he was a sage admired and venerated as an oracle of moral, even of Christian edification, a master of literary style, and a model for dramatic art. Early life, family, and adulthood. Seneca was born in Cordoba in the Roman province of Baetica in Hispania. His branch of the Enneac gens consisted of Italic colonists of Umbrian or Pelingian origins. His father was Lucius Aeneas Seneca the Elder, a Spanish-born Roman knight who gained fame as a writer and teacher of rhetoric in Rome. Seneca's mother, Helvia, was from a prominent Boeotian family. Seneca was the second of 3 brothers. The others were Lucius Annaeus Novatus, later known as Junius Gallio, and Annaeus Mela, the father of the poet Lucan. Miriam Griffin says in her biography of Seneca that the evidence for Seneca's life before his exile in 41 is so slight, and the potential of the interest in these years for social history as well as for biography is so great that few writers on Seneca have resisted the temptation to eke out knowledge with imagination. Griffin also infers from the ancient sources that Seneca was born either 8, 4, or 1 BC. She thinks he was born between 4 and 1 BC, and was resident in Rome by AD 5. Seneca is said to have been taken to Rome in the arms of his aunt, his mother's stepsister, at a young age, probably when he was about 5 years old. His father resided for much of his life in the city. Seneca was taught the usual subjects of literature, grammar, and rhetoric, as part of the standard education of high-born Romans. While still young, he received philosophical training from Attalus, the Stoic, and from Socion and Papirius Fabianus, both of whom belonged to the short-lived school of the Sextii, which combined Stoicism with Pythagoreanism. Socian pursued Seneca when he was a young man, in his early 20s, to become a vegetarian, which he practiced for around a year before his father urged him to desist because the practice was associated with some foreign rites. Seneca often had breathing difficulties throughout his life, probably asthma, and at some point in his mid-20s, he appears to have been struck down with tuberculosis. He was sent to Egypt to live with his aunt, the same aunt who had brought him to Rome, whose husband Gaius Galerius had become prefect of Egypt. She nursed him through a period of ill health that lasted up to 10 years. In 31 AD, he returned to Rome with his aunt and his uncle dying en route in a shipwreck. His aunt's influence helped Seneca be elected quaestor, which also earned him the right to sit in the Roman Senate. Politics and exile. Seneca's early career as a senator seems to have been successful, and he was praised for his oratory. In his writings, Seneca has nothing good to say about Caligula, and frequently depicts him as a monster. Cassius Dio relates the story that Caligula was so offended by Seneca's oratorical success in the Senate that he ordered him to commit suicide. Seneca survived only because he was seriously ill, and Caligula was told that he would soon die anyway. Seneca explains his own survival is due to his patience and his devotion to his friends. I wanted to avoid the impression that all I could do for loyalty was die. In AD 41, Claudius became emperor, and Seneca was accused by the new empress Messalina of adultery with Julia Livia, sister to Caligula and Agrippina. The affair has been doubted by some historians, since Messalina had clear political motives for getting rid of Julia Livia and her supporters. The Senate pronounced a death sentence on Seneca, which Claudius commuted to exile, and Seneca spent the next 8 years on the island of Corsica. Two of Seneca's earliest surviving works date from the period of his exile, both consolations. In his Consolation to Helvia, his mother, Seneca comforts her as a bereaved mother for losing her son to exile. Seneca incidentally mentions the death of his only son, a few weeks before his exile. Later in life, Seneca was married to a woman younger than himself, Pompeia Paulina. It has been thought that the infant son may have been from an earlier marriage, but the evidence is tenuous. Seneca's other work of this period, his Consolation to Polybius, one of Claudius's freedmen, focused on consoling Polybius in the death of his brother. It is noted for its flattery of Claudius, and Seneca expresses his hope that the emperor will recall him from exile. In 49 AD, Agrippina married her uncle Claudius, and through her influence, Seneca was recalled to Rome. Agrippina gained the praetorship for Seneca and appointed him tutor to her son, the future Emperor Nero. From AD 54 to 62, Seneca acted as Nero's advisor, together with Praetorian Prefect Sextus Afranius Burrus. Early in Nero's reign, his mother Agrippina exercised his authority to make decisions. Seneca and Burrus opposed this authoritarian matriarchy, which had become the cause of irresponsibility of the emperor. One byproduct of his new position was that Seneca was appointed suffect consul in 56. Seneca's influence was said to have been especially strong in the first year. Seneca composed Nero's accession speeches, in which he promised to restore proper legal procedure and authority to the Senate. He also composed the eulogy for Claudius that Nero delivered at the funeral. Seneca's satirical skit, Apocolosyntosis, which lampoons the deification of Claudius and praises Nero, dates from the earliest period of Nero's reign. In AD 55, Seneca wrote On Clemency, following Nero's murder of Britannicus, perhaps to assure the citizenry that the murder was the end, not the beginning of bloodshed. On Clemency is a work which, although it flatters Nero, was intended to show the correct or stoic path of virtue for a ruler. Tacitus and Dio suggest that Nero's early rule, during which he listened to Seneca and Burrus, was quite competent. However, the ancient sources suggest that, over time, Seneca and Burrus lost their influence over the emperor. In 59, they had reluctantly agreed to Agrippina's murder, and afterward Tacitus reports that Seneca had to write a letter justifying the murder to the Senate. In AD 58, the senator Publius Sullius Rufus made a series of public attacks on Seneca. These attacks, reported by Tacitus and Cassius Dio, included charges that, in a mere 4 years of service to Nero, Seneca had acquired a vast personal fortune of 300 million sestertii by charging high interest on loans throughout Italy and the provinces. Sullius's attacks included claims of sexual corruption, with a suggestion that Seneca had slept with Agrippina. Tacitus, though, reports that Sullius was highly prejudiced and had been in favor of Claudius, or a favorite of Claudius, and had been an embezzler and informant. In response, Seneca brought a series of prosecutions for corruption against Sullius. Half of his estate was confiscated, and he was sent into exile. However, the attacks reflect the criticism of Seneca that was made at the time and continued through later ages. Seneca was undoubtedly extremely rich. He had properties at Baiae and Nomentum and Alban Villa, and Egyptian estates. Cassius Dio even reports that the Boudica uprising in Britannia was caused by Seneca forcing large loans on the indigenous British aristocracy in the aftermath of Claudius's conquest of Britain, and then calling them in suddenly and aggressively. Seneca was sensitive to such accusations. His De Vita Beata on the happy life dates from around this time and includes a defense of wealth along Stoic lines, arguing that properly gaining and spending wealth is appropriate behavior for a philosopher. To drink some water here. After Barus's death in 62, Seneca's influence declined rapidly. As Tacitus puts it, Mors Burrae infregit Senecae potentiam. The death of Burrus broke Seneca's power. Tacitus reports that Seneca tried to retire twice, in 62 and AD 64, but Nero refused him on both occasions. Nevertheless, Seneca was increasingly absent from the court. He adopted a quiet lifestyle on his country estates, concentrating on his studies and seldom visiting Rome. It was during these final few years that he composed two of his greatest works, Naturalis Questions, an encyclopedia of the natural world, and his Letters to Lucilius, which document his philosophical thoughts. In AD 65, Seneca was caught up in the aftermath of the Pisonian conspiracy, a plot to kill Nero. Although it is unlikely that Seneca was part of the conspiracy, Nero ordered him to kill himself. Seneca followed tradition by severing several veins in order to bleed to death, and his wife Pompeia Paulina attempted to share his fate. Cassius Dio, who wished to emphasize the relentlessness of Nero, focused on how Seneca had attended to his last-minute letters, and how his death was hastened by soldiers. A generation after the Julio-Claudian emperors, Tacitus wrote an account of the suicide, which, in view of his Republican sympathies, is perhaps somewhat romanticized. According to this account, Nero ordered Seneca's wife saved. Her wounds were bound up, and she made no further attempt to kill herself. As for Seneca himself, his age and diet were blamed for slow loss of blood and extended pain rather than a quick death. He also took poison, which was not fatal. After dictating his last words to a scribe, and with a circle of friends attending him in his home, he immersed himself in a warm bath, which he expected would speed blood flow to ease his pain. Tacitus wrote, "He was then carried into a bath, with the steam of which he was suffocated, and he was burnt without any of the usual funeral rites. So he had directed in a codicil of his will. Even when in the height of his wealth and power, he was thinking of life's close." This may give the impression of a favorable portrait of Seneca, but Tacitus's treatment of him is at best ambivalent. Alongside Seneca's apparent fortitude in the face of death, for example, one can also view his actions as rather histrionic and performative. And when Tacitus tells us that he left his family in imago sua vitae, an image of his life, he is possibly being ambiguous. In Roman culture, the imago was a kind of mask that commemorated the great ancestors of noble families, but at the same time it may also suggest duplicity, superficiality, and pretense. As a major philosophical figure of the Roman imperial period, Seneca's lasting contribution to philosophy has been to the school of Stoicism. Though his writing is highly accessible and was the subject of attention from the Renaissance onwards by writers such as Michel de Montaigne, right? Yeah. He has been described as a towering and controversial figure of antiquity, and the world's most interesting Stoic. Seneca wrote a number of books on Stoicism, mostly on ethics, with one work, Naturalis Questions, on the physical world. Seneca built on the writings of many of the earlier Stoics. He often mentions Zeno, Cleanthes, and Chrysippus, and frequently cites Posidonius, with whom Seneca shared an interest in natural phenomena. He frequently quotes Epicurus, especially in his letters. His interest in Epicurus is mainly limited to using him as a source of ethical maxims. Likewise, Seneca shows some interest in Platonist metaphysics, but never with any clear commitment. His moral essays are based on Stoic doctrines. Stoicism was a popular philosophy in this period, and many upper-class Romans found it in it a guiding ethical framework for political involvement. It was once more popular to regard Seneca as being very eclectic in his Stoicism, but modern scholarship views him as fairly orthodox Stoic, albeit a free-minded one. His works discuss both ethical theory and practical advice, and Seneca stresses that both parts are distinct but interdependent. His letters to Lucilius show Seneca's search for ethical perfection, and represent a sort of philosophical testament for posterity. Seneca regards philosophy as a balm for the wounds of life. The destructive passions, especially anger and grief, must be uprooted, or moderated according to reason. He discusses the relative merits of the contemplative life and the active life, and he considers it important to confront one's own mortality and be able to face death. One must be willing to practice poverty and use wealth properly. And he writes about favors, clemency, the importance of friendship, and the need to benefit others. The universe is governed for the best by a rational providence, and this must be reconciled with acceptance of adversity. Hey, good evening, Halsey. Good to see you. 10 plays are attributed to Seneca, of which most likely 8 were written by him. The plays stand in stark contrast to his philosophical works, with their intense emotions and grim overall tone. The plays seem to represent the antithesis of Seneca's Stoic beliefs. Up to the 16th century, it was normal to distinguish between Seneca, the moral philosopher, and Seneca, the dramatist, as two separate people. Scholars have tried to spot certain Stoic themes. It is the uncontrolled passions that generate madness, ruination, and self-destruction. This has a cosmic as well as an ethical aspect, and fate is a powerful, albeit rather oppressive force. Many scholars have thought, following the ideas of the 19th century German scholar Friedrich Leo, that Seneca's tragedies were written for recitation only. Other scholars think that they were written for performance, and that it is possible that actual performance took place in Seneca's lifetime. Ultimately, this issue cannot be resolved on the basis of our existing knowledge. The tragedies of Seneca have been successfully staged in modern times. The dating of the tragedies is highly problematic in the absence of any ancient references. A parody of lament from Hercules Furens appears in the Apocolocyntosis, which applies a date before AD 54 for that play. A relative chronology has been proposed on metrical grounds. The plays are not all based on the Greek pattern. They have a 5-act form and differ in many respects from the extant Attic drama. And while the influence of Euripides on some of these works is considerable, so is the influence of Virgil and Ovid. Seneca's plays were widely read in medieval and Renaissance European universities and strongly influenced tragic drama in that time, such as Elizabethan England, William Shakespeare and other playwrights, France, Corneille and Racine, and the Netherlands, Just van den Wandel. English translations of Seneca's tragedies appeared in print in the mid-16th century, with all 10 published collectively in 1581, and he is regarded as the source and inspiration for what is known as revenge tragedy, starting with Thomas Kyd's The Spanish Tragedy and continuing well into the Jacobean era. Thyestes is considered Seneca's masterpiece, and has been described to scholar Dana Gioia as one of the most influential plays ever written. Medea is also highly regarded and was praised along with Phaedra by T.S. Eliot. And here's a list of them. And a list of his essays. Interesting fellow. As a proto-Christian saint. Seneca's writings were well known in the later Roman period, and Quintilian, writing 30 years after Seneca's death, remarked on the popularity of his works amongst the youth. While he found much to admire, Quintilian criticized Seneca for what he regarded as a degenerate literary style, a criticism echoed by Aulus Gellius in the middle of the 2nd century. The early Christian church was very favorably disposed towards Seneca and his writings, and the church leader Tertullian possessively referred to him as our Seneca. By the 4th century, an apocryphal correspondence with Paul the Apostle had been created linking Seneca into the Christian tradition. The letters were mentioned by Jerome, who also included Seneca among a list of Christian writers, and Seneca is similarly mentioned by Augustine. In the 6th century, Martin of Braga synthesized Seneca's thought into a couple of treatises that became popular in their own right. Otherwise, Seneca was mainly known through a large number of quotes and extracts in the Florilegia, which were popular throughout the medieval period. When his writings were read in the later Middle Ages, it was mostly his letters to Lucilius, the longer essays and plays being relatively unknown. Wow. And there's some disputed quotations. So that's the guy. Just wanted to read a little bit about him. I'm going to get out of here. It's getting close to my bedtime. But, yeah, I don't know. Let me know what you think of the new channel brand and stuff. And whether you enjoy the history content. Figured I'd throw that in there. Alright. Much love. Be well. Stay trusty. See you later.